This show is sponsored by Mighty Capital, the go-to venture capital firm for product-first companies like Airbnb and Amplitude. Learn why they are dubbed the best value for the dollar invested at mighty.capital. I'm SC Moadi, founder and chair of Products That Count, a 501c3 nonprofit engaging over 500,000 product managers. Our mission is simple: help you build great products through groundbreaking research, prestigious awards, and top-notch programming like this award-winning Top 1% podcast. Whether you're aiming to boost your career or turn your product team into a competitive advantage, this is your gateway. Visit productsthatcount.org and begin your product leadership journey. This particular series is hosted by one of the first chief product officers in the world, Renee, Niemi, and each episode is a masterclass in product leadership. Renee, over to you.
So today I have with me Dylan Casey. He is the Chief Product Officer of WISEcode, and he is a finalist on our 2024 Best CPO in the World Award. So first of all, Dylan, thanks for joining. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and congratulations for being a finalist.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive in, have lots of questions to ask you. I've been looking forward to this. Why don't we start by you just introducing yourself in 60 seconds or less, and then sharing with us what WISEcode does and specifically what you do for WISEcode.
Great. So my name is Dylan Casey, and WISEcode is essentially a food nutrition science company. And I'm coming in at a time that the company is making a transition from being purely R&D focused to essentially becoming a commercial company. So it's a really interesting time to come into the company as a chief product officer because it doesn't have a product in market yet. It doesn't have a revenue stream. And so while it's a startup in every sense of the word, it is also a very early stage startup. And so it presents a whole new, or a whole different set of challenges as a chief product officer, because it's not only, facing a lot of the challenges that most CPOs face with regards to building an organization or running an organization, but we also have the objective of finding product market fit and becoming a commercial company. So it's a unique time. And what WISEcode does, and WISE basically is an acronym for what I should eat. And we're focusing essentially on giving people and customers more transparency into the foods that they eat. And the current problem is that right now, food manufacturers are only required to indicate 15 items, which are found on the nutrition fact panel, which are essentially a breakdown of macronutrients and the volume of the food. And then the ingredients basically stack ranked on the volume inside of in the food. So what we're doing is basically giving customers access to all the other information that's in the food through essentially machine learning and some scientific lab testing that we're running.
Wow, those are really exciting times, and I think it might also be helpful. Like what viewpoint are you coming in from as you enter this role? Because I know this is a reasonably recent transition for you, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm 2 months into the job, but I mean, I've had a pretty broad set of experiences with regards to product management, kind of starting early in my career at Google in 2003. And I've had the opportunity to work on, both consumer and enterprise products. I've worked on developer platforms. I've worked in industries from consumer, internet technology to banks like Goldman Sachs, and then even interesting kind of supply chain challenging environments like, running 2,000 food essentially, ghost kitchens. So I've had a bunch of different experiences, but this one is definitely unique.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that context. We're all made up of the stories that we've experienced through our career, and would love to just start with a story that at any given point in your career where you kind of took a step back and said, wow, I am so excited. This is definitely the spot for me. What can you share with us? Yeah.
Well, what another thing about my background and my history that I didn't share is that before working in the technology industry, I was a professional cyclist, and through a combination of luck and determination, I managed to get a job at Google. And I remember when I was making that transition, not just from an industry perspective, but like, a career perspective. At first, I was a little bit, I was trying to find my way. Like, how was I, going to be able to make an impact? And, um, how were the things that made me successful as an athlete going to, how was I going to leverage those things in this new environment? And I remember, one of the jobs, or one of the things that you got to do as a product manager early in your career at Google at the time, was essentially sit in on executive meetings and take notes. And it was a real, it was the kind of task that at first seemed kind of remedial, but I soon realized was incredibly valuable, because I got to have exposure to, not only what the executive team was talking about, but also all the different functions across the company. And then, of course, I got to listen to some of, kind of like really big strategic discussions. And, at the time, we were really focused on competing with Microsoft. And of course, we were a little tiny startup. They had a huge budget. They were a big company. And I remember this one moment where we were, everybody in the room was perplexed about, how are we going to compete in the marketplace, so to speak. And I remember Eric Schmidt, who was the CEO at the time, basically stood up and kind of pounded his fists on the desk and said, listen, we have some of the smartest engineers in the world. We have a great product vision and a great idea, and we're executing really well. We have everything we need to compete. And it was that moment where I realized that, oh, I know how to play this game. Like, I understand this, this field of play, or this, it was like kind of a corollary to sports. And it really was just about, competition. Clearly it was, a big part of being successful. And I thought back to, when I was an athlete, what did I need to be successful? And it was really clear. I needed to have an objective. I needed to understand what tools and resources I had available to me to help me achieve that objective. Typically there was a date, which by that you were trying to achieve this objective, and you would more or less work backwards from that, and that would become your training program. Well, in the world of technology, that equates to having a roadmap. So that was this moment where everything kind of crystallized, and I gained a lot of confidence and understanding how to be successful in that world.
Yeah, that's just a really unique view into some probably fairly pivotal conversations that have shaped,
Yeah.
the tech industry as a whole. So
Yeah.
I would love to have a beer with you sometime and hear some of those stories. But and I happen to know the side of you. You and I've chatted about that professional athlete angle, and how it just taught you how to be competitive. Would love, as we kind of continue this dialogue, any other analogies there, I think would just be really helpful, because
Sure.
on the surface, you're like professional athlete, chief product officer, what's the connection? But there's got to be just so much rigor, so much grit, so much preparation, where there's got to be a ton of analogs between the two.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Huge crossover.
interesting. Well, great story. Well, let's transition. Like, as you've kind of gone through your product career, which has spanned a lot of different industries and several years now, what superpowers have you developed? What do you think is kind of your secret sauce?
Well, I think from, obviously my background as an athlete, you can't have success without perseverance. And I think that's just a requirement, so to speak. But I think the superpower that has served me well throughout my career, in lots of different situations, whether it's at a startup or a more established public company setting, or working on a consumer product versus an enterprise product, or a developer platform, or a product that is already in the marketplace, or something that you're building from scratch. I think the one thing that has really stood out in all of those situations that has been critical to my success is understanding the context. And just like I had a general framework for being successful as an athlete, I learned how to apply that framework to all of those different scenarios, with the key variable being taking into account the unique attributes of the context and adjusting the framework.
Right.
And I think that's been one of the things that has really served me well in all of my jobs.
Yeah. So, can you give me an example in the product world, how you've applied that and what the outcome was?
Yeah, I think one of the most prominent variables that has stood out in my career is, stepping into a situation where you're essentially taking over a lot of the um, role and responsibility of the CEO slash founder, right? Oftentimes, the CEO founder of a company, of a startup, will reach a point in either, their role or the company's life cycle where they identify the need to hire somebody to come in and run the product team. And, in my experience, in that particular moment, you're stepping into a role where there's already a very established product vision. And in many cases, you're probably taking over a product portfolio that's already in the market. And so your job is less about, creating the product vision and more about getting everybody to work well together. And so understanding that nuance and that context is really important. Whereas, in another situation, and this is probably more true as an individual contributor, you might be taking over a product or launching a product that really doesn't have a product vision yet, right? And it doesn't have product market fit. And your job is to figure that out. And oftentimes I think product managers want to have control over the product and control over the vision. And a lot of that has to do, I think, with ego and just kind of the mystique of being a product manager. But I think the key to success is understanding, where in the spectrum you are and adjusting appropriately. Because oftentimes your job, especially coming into a chief product role, is not necessarily, defining the product vision, but looking at the company and looking at the product landscape and understanding what has to be done in order for the company to reach its next evolutionary step or to reach its next set of milestones. Oftentimes, the next critical milestone is another round of funding. So it's critical to take a step back and say, okay, what does this company, or what do we need to be able to achieve in order to raise that next round of funding? And, maybe that's even an IPO, which is essentially, the same type of mechanism. But having that insight and being able to kind of look at the context or look at the landscape of what's going on is really critical.
Amazing. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense to me, and I can see how that was, a superpower, if you will. How have you translated that into what I would categorize as a best practice? So think about, repeatability, scalability, and things your team can kind of embrace,
Yeah.
and really differentiate themselves around.
So I have this either a philosophy or a hypothesis that says that by putting in place, a foundational framework for how the team is going to develop products, or which may even include how the company sets its priorities and its objectives. If you can put in place, a shared framework and a shared understanding about how that framework is going to work, you actually free up time and energy and focus for the real kind of creative work, right? Or the real product work, if you will. And so, in several different roles, I've either introduced, kind of like what I might call the product development framework. And in my current job, I actually kind of up-leveled it to encompass the entire company. And I referenced it as the company operating system. And I really believe that if you can put in place those rituals and, kind of a shared understanding of how you're going to work together, it just becomes second nature, and you can kind of put a lot of it on autopilot. I mean, everything from product, how are you going to run a product review? How are you going to run design reviews, engineering reviews, architecture reviews, and at what point in the development cycle do those occur? And you have to tailor those to the product, right? And the customer profile that you're serving, because there's no one right way to do it. And again, I think this is where understanding the context is really critical. And, kind of being able to customize the framework, so to speak, is really critical to, laying down that foundational work. And again, my main philosophy is that if you put all that stuff in place, then you free up time and energy and focus for doing, really deep product and deep creative work.
Yeah, I love that. So obviously, within the context of frameworks, there's all sorts of rituals. Some are very boring and foundational, and some of them are kind of unique. Do you have any fun, unique rituals you'd be willing to share with us?
Well, I think, again, it really depends on the company and the product. But one that I try to do as often as I can, assuming that there's room for it, is really to include everybody who wants to participate in, essentially the ideation process of product development. So in an ideal scenario, you essentially get a set of milestones from the top, and then you have a bottoms up process where you can ideate on how you're going to achieve those milestones. And so by including everybody in that process, I think you not only get everybody to participate, but I think you also get better ideas.
Yeah.
So that's one. And I think the other one, and this was probably influenced by my time at Google is having a regular, weekly demos and drinks where you kind of get together, and it gives everybody an opportunity to just show what they're working on. And that can be everything from, demoing, a prototype that somebody has built, or just going over like, a product marketing campaign that the team is working on. So that's something that I've tried to do at almost every place that I've worked. And I think it's good for the team, and it builds morale, and gives everybody a chance to kind of show off what they're working on.
Yeah, I actually really like both of those. When I think about the good ideas can come from anywhere, I especially love not only the fact that you probably get some really unique perspectives that are diverse,
Yeah.
but you also, more than likely are going to be, sometimes the product managers themselves can suffer from what I call the curse of knowledge, right? It's like you almost know a little too much, and like, oh, no, I know that. And what's great about, some of these outside folks coming in is that they have a fresh set of eyes, if you will, to look at the problem and ways to solve for it. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I really love that. Excellent. So obviously, as a CPO, and especially as a startup CPO, you have so many pulls on your time, so many people who want a piece of you. And I've often felt like, as an executive, like how I budget my time is probably like one of the most highly valued activities I can do. So I was always incredibly purposeful on time management. Tell me a little bit about how you think about your time and how you allocate where you spend your time.
Yeah, I've probably tackled this problem, dozens of times, all with different strategies and probably different tactics. But I remember as an athlete learning this lesson that has really stuck with me throughout my career of, essentially make sure you do the most important things of the day first, right? Or, make sure you understand, what has to, what are the things that only you can do, and then try to delegate everything else is kind of another tactic. But, I remember as an athlete, especially, in the sport of cycling, it's not like you're going to quote practice every day with a coach telling you what to do. You're really responsible for your own, or executing your own training program. And, inevitably there would be days where you'd get distracted by, your kind of to-do list. And, the thing about your to-do list is oftentimes it's made of things that, whether they got done today or tomorrow, it doesn't really matter, right? Whereas if you don't do your training that day, it's not like you can do more training the next day, because that defeats the whole purpose, right? That's not how the programming works, so to speak. So I try to kind of look at my day the same way, like, okay, what are the things that have to happen today? And I make those a priority. And so that's kind of on a very micro, day-to-day tactical level.
Yeah.
But at the more macro level, I'm pretty maniacal about saying, okay, what are the big things that I'm trying to get done this quarter, right? Or whatever time frame I'm looking at. And then I just kind of constantly check, whether it's on a weekly basis or maybe even a monthly basis, how am I tracking towards that? Because, it's a kind of the classic scenario of, you get what you measure, you get what you focus on. And so I think it's just having discipline and focus around making sure that my time is spent on the things that are absolutely critical. I also kind of joke that, one of the most important things is figuring out what you can ignore, right? Because there's always going to be there's always going to be things that are on your plate that, if you let them, they'll take all your time. But then there's always things that, like, if you ignore them and you don't do them, probably nothing bad is going to happen. So,
Do you have any good examples of something like that where you know?
well, I think in today's world, whether it's, Slack or whatever messaging tool you use, if you try to keep up with everything, you're gonna spend all day reading and answering messages.
I
So
also feel like it's like with that one example in particular, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because if you're expected, like if you respond right away and they're like the bar gets raised, and it's like
yeah,
almost like time slicing it. I'll do 10 minutes at the beginning of the day, 10 minutes in the middle of the day, 10
yeah,
minutes at the end of the day, and that's it. You know.
yeah. Well, I actually have a document that I've written over the years that I share with people that I work with that basically tells you, like, what you can expect from me with regards to communications. Like, for example, if you send me an email, I promise I'll respond within 24 to 48 hours. If you send me a message on Slack, I'll respond within the day. And if you send me a message on text or call me, obviously I'll respond as quickly as I possibly can. And so there's, like, it's kind of my own SLA for everything.
But it also,
And then,
but sorry for interrupting, but what I was going to say is, and what's great about that is it teaches people how to think about, like, how important is this,
yeah.
and use the appropriate vehicle.
Yeah, and there's lots of little rituals that or kind of like nuances that I've created. Like, for example, like, if you're going to send me an email, just tell me what you need in the email. Like, make it very clear and explicit. I have the same, like, kind of guidance around meetings. Like, start the meeting by declaring what has to happen by the end of the meeting in order for us to adjourn. Like, make it really, really clear. Why are we here? What do we need to get done in this meeting? And how will we know when we've accomplished that? So I think little things like that, just having lots of intentionality and clarity around what you're doing is important. But and then on the flip side of that, especially given kind of the remote nature of how we work together now, I think it's also important to carve out time for just chit chat and just, like, small talk. And but like, I'm pretty intentional about when I'm in, let's get stuff done, or, like, hey, let's just hang out and chat about what happened over the weekend. So I think, just being more intentional about how you spending your time is the key to, making sure that you're getting as much stuff as you can get done.
Yeah. Some really great nuggets of advice in there. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It looks like our time has gone so fast together, but I would be remiss if I didn't spend at least one question on AI.
Yeah.
We can't talk product management these days without
Of course.
at least bringing AI up once. Obviously there are a lot of folks that are kind of rethinking process and tools related to the role of product management,
Yeah.
but by leveraging kind of some of the things AI brings to us. What are your thoughts on how AI will impact product management, both this year and maybe 2 years out?
Well, I think there's a couple of different contexts to look at it. So obviously everybody's asking, or to your question, how is AI going to affect the job of product management? And so I kind of think of that as internal functioning, and then the other question is, how is it going to influence the product, and how is it going to influence the customer experience? And I think there's probably, depending on what your product is, lots of overlap, right? But one of the ways that I've been thinking about it recently is, how can product managers utilize AI tools to essentially make them more effective, right? So I think of, I've always believed that technology, there's like a sweet spot of technology, which is where it can amplify something that we already do, or it can enable something that we couldn't do without technology, right? Video conferencing is an example of the latter. But in the case of product managers, I'm starting to think about a way that, product managers almost, or I should say artificial intelligence almost makes a product manager 2 levels more powerful or more capable than what they're currently capable of, right? So if you look at leveling of product managers with regards to kind of like their experience or what they've worked on or what kind of institutional knowledge they have or subject matter expert knowledge they have. And let's say you're a PM1, or a PM2. I think with AI tools, you can automatically expect that person to operate at 1 to 2 levels higher than they currently are.
That's massive, right? The implications are pretty broad.
Right. So I think that means that the scope of their role expands, and I think maybe even the size of their product portfolio grows significantly. And I think that there's also I think I think the role of a product manager can actually expand as well. So for example, prior to the availability of a lot of these tools, product managers relied on data engineers to essentially do a lot of analysis or to set up, infrastructure to do analysis on logs or user feedback and stuff like that. So I think now the product manager can do a lot of that themselves, right? So I think there's an example where the PM can actually operate a level or 2 above where they are right now, and then also expand, what the function or what things can the product manager do. For example, early days of Google, we had this tool called Dremel that we could use to query the search logs, which was amazing, right? And it was a great tool. Well, now I think like those tools are all going to be, like 10x more powerful or more capable, which means that the product manager is going to be 10x more powerful and capable. So I think that's
right, the context and the learning. So hopefully that will accelerate and improve decision making, and make the products richer and more on target, right? As long as we're querying the right things, I guess.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's been a lot of talk about prompt engineering and kind of like the role of that. I think also, you're going to see a lot more English majors that will be great product managers because they'll know exactly how to articulate the right prompt.
That's a really interesting perspective. So at some level, does it democratize then the role of product?
I think so. I mean, obviously it depends on the product, but I think, I still believe that understanding, kind of the engineering architecture and how machines work and servers and, a lot of the infrastructure work is still important and critical to being effective as a PM. But ultimately, the role of essentially having empathy for the customer or the user experience is going to is going to become a really important part of the role as well.
Yeah. Well, lots of stuff to think about. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective on that one. Dylan, wonderful to talk to you. And thank you for spending your time. And again, congratulations for being a finalist.
Thanks. It was my pleasure.
This is SC Moadi again, founder and chair of Products That Count. Thank you for listening to this episode. If you like what you heard, be sure to leave us a review on your favorite platform, including Spotify and Apple. And please check out our other resources at productsthatcount.org. They're designed to accelerate your product career and make product the most important function in business. Until soon.